Welcome to BioIT World's Trends from the Trenches podcast, your insider's look at the science, technology, and executive trends driving the life sciences. I'm Allison Proffitt, editor of BioIT World. This episode is hosted by Stan Gloss, founder of BioTeam, a life sciences IT consulting company at the intersection of science, data, and technology. Joining Stan today is Renee Iacona, Vice President, Oncology Biometrics, Oncology R&D at AstraZeneca. They discuss how data are changing in pharma and oncology research, the power of multimodal data, and the tension between building tools and building data sets. Let's listen in.
Well, good afternoon, Renee. I'm so excited to have a chance to talk to you. I actually had this one circled so close to Thanksgiving, and I'm really thankful that we can actually do this. And part of the reason I wanted to talk to you is 22 years ago when I founded my company was the year my father passed away with pancreatic cancer. And to have an opportunity to talk to somebody in the area of oncology and getting an update, really is, one, it's personally interesting to me to hear about that. So I'd love to get into the state of oncology and where oncology is today in terms of what's driving the pipelines, how are you using data, how are you leveraging AI? Is AI really delivering value to what you're doing? So I'd love to get into all of that with you today. But maybe first, for the people who don't know who you are, maybe just introduce yourself and a little bit about your background and a little bit about the work that you do at AstraZeneca would be great.
Okay. So I'm Renee Iacona, Renee Bailey Iacona. This is my 24th year at AstraZeneca. So
Wow.
I'd like to say I've grown up at AstraZeneca because I started right out of university after my PhD here at AZ, and I have grown up at AstraZeneca. I have worked about probably 22 of those years in oncology. And so, I'm a lifelonger advocate for oncology research and development. And so that's where I've spent a lot of my time. My background, I actually have a PhD in pathology where I studied breast cancer research at Vanderbilt University, but I also got an interest in biometrics or biostatistics at that time. And so I have merged both sides of my brain from a science and maths perspective and have spent a large portion of my time analyzing the clinical trial data, designing clinical trials, and as you said, now looking at what else we can do with all of the data that we have collected in those clinical trials. And so that's a little bit about my background. You'll also hear me twang every once in a while because I'm originally from Nashville, Tennessee. So it's hard to hide that. So I'm definitely came from a background was the first to go to college, the first to go to grad school. So while my mom and dad aren't alive anymore, they never really understood what I do. So I always love sessions like this that I could, tell them, hey, you want to know what I do? Go listen to this podcast.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I mean, growing up in an organization and what struck me is the length of time that you've done oncology. So maybe I'd love to get your perspective on how oncology has changed from the time that you started working on it. What was it like then? And how has it progressed to what it is now?
So one of the biggest differences is the number of treatments that are now available. So when your relative died of pancreatic cancer, the number of treatments that were available then and what's available now has changed. Watching that change over my time to where we went from chemotherapy being the primary treatment to now seeing the immunotherapies come around, or now looking at things like cell therapy and the antibody drug conjugates and the combinations of all of that, like it actually is mind-boggling to think about all the new treatments that are available in just not that long of a time in sort of cancer treatment history, if you think of it that way. Because it's only been in the last probably 12 years that IO blossomed, and now some of the other things have come to be. So I would say it's very different from what was available when I first started at AZ to now, for sure.
So it's interesting with all of those treatments that are now available. How does one even think about matching all the combinations of treatments with the patient and the type of cancer? And now you talked about so many combinations, but then you also have the combinations of patients and matching. That must be a pretty difficult thing to do.
I mean, I can't imagine if I'd been a physician treating patients now, what all the options are in front of a physician to decide how to treat one of our relatives with all the different things that are now options. But I do know that the use of, data and tools that will help physicians make decisions exist now that didn't exist in the past. But from my perspective, it definitely comes down to data, because we would really love to be able to treat a patient with the best treatment for them. And, we're not as far as eventually I think we will get to, where if I were to get something, they will biomarker test me and that will tell them this is what we should give Renee versus this is what we would give someone else. But we're further along than we used to be. And so now things like biomarker testing and understanding the patient's tumor and what that tumor is made up of, it's definitely different today than it was before. And if you and I were doing a podcast 5 to 10 years from now, I think it'll even advance more so. But biomarker testing is a springboard around that to get it more personalized, for sure.
So it sounds like a lot of your work centers around the data. So let's start with talking about data, because most of the pharmaceutical companies that I speak to generate a lot of data and of all kinds of things, and managing that data and finding that data and the dream of having what's called fair data.
Yep. Or fairer.
Or fairer.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it's far data because it's just not interoperable. So it's kind of far from there, but fair, close. So
yep.
When it comes to that part of the beginning parts of building your data repository, because now when I came into the industry, same time you did, if you talk to a pharmaceutical company, their biggest asset was their compound library. But now their data has really pivoted over. And so how is AZ in specifically data around oncology? How is that managed, and how do you wrangle it so that you can get the value from it?
So what's been fascinating is to watch that journey, not only as we have grown as a company in oncology, but just as the amount of data that we collect in one trial has grown. Because with new digital devices, you can collect more data from a patient than we used to be able to.
Mm-hmm.
And so now the amounts of data and how you structure that data from what we call a metadata perspective, almost like defining here's the data we collected and here's what it represents. So almost giving a dictionary, I'm going to call it that, so that you know what you've collected. And 5 years from now, you know what you collected because you have a metadata dictionary to help you decipher that. I think the other thing that we've had to sort through is standardizing the data. Because if we collect it in different ways, then eventually we wouldn't be able to combine it as easily. And the power of the future is being able to combine that data and make it findable, accessible, reusable, et cetera, as you called fair. And that's not as easy as you might think that we've had to tackle how you combine that data. If I just say AstraZeneca's, had a lot of lung cancer trials, and I focus just on lung cancer for a moment, combining all of those lung cancer trial data where we can use it to then explore and get the power of the data out of it, it has taken us a while in which to invest in the way in which to store it, the way in which to explore, can we reuse it? Because the laws around patient data privacy dictate whether we can reuse it or not. And knowing that we can reuse maybe this person's data, but not this person's data, it's created complications, but it's important that we follow all of those regulations to do it correctly. So just all of that sort of structure and infrastructure to be able to use it has been a big tackle that we've had to make for sure. Then to have the tools and the computer power and the talents that know what to do with all of that data has been sort of another stage of it. And that's, I think, the phase that we're in now, that we're having to think about the computer power. You hear about quantum computing, which is the future, but just being able to have the right computers and have the right skill set of data scientists, for example, who can make use of that and be able to teach scientists a little bit about data science. That's sort of the area that we're in now. So because more and more, I think eventually more people will understand what machine learning means and what AI means. But for some right now, it's this mysterious word that they don't know exactly what they're talking about. They just know it's the new buzzword. But we need to find the people who really know what it means so that we can get their skill sets looking at the data.
I love that description of working with the scientist and data scientists as is part of teams so that they're, because I think there's a misnomer. I mean, I think data scientists are just people that we're putting in place right now because we need a generation of scientists that have grown up with just data, and it's just science. It's not. I think this step that we're in a kind of interim step where we need somebody that's called a data scientist. But in time, every scientist will be a data scientist because. So it's just struck me when you said that.
Well, what we need is scientists who can understand machine learning and AI, but more importantly, we also need machine learning and AI experts who can understand the science. Because if you can't talk to each other, then you're not ever going to get the value out of both of those. And so we call those translators. You need people who can translate across both of those languages to get the value out of both of them. And we actually have created a data science academy to help our scientists learn a little bit about data science, and our data scientists learn how to speak scientist language. And so we've actually been building up the capabilities in-house of our scientists to learn enough about data science to not feel intimidated by it. But you're right. Even the physicians and scientists that we're hiring now out of school, they have learned about data science. They've grown up a little bit with it. And eventually it will be one and the same. Everybody will know what that means and will have been educated in a component of it.
Yeah. So the hard part right now is managing 80% of the efforts is just in the management of that data.
Yep.
I mean, because if you stop and think about it for a second, if you have built really good, clean data sets that are, AI ready they're ready to go into the AI algorithm, feeding good, clean, structured data into an AI algorithm to do its work is not the hard. It's not the hard part. The hard part is really having that training set, that validated data set, isn't it? Is that right?
I mean, if you're trying to explore something at first, you don't need it to be, quote, validated. But if you eventually want to prove something, then you're really now going to want to know that it's not been affected by noise. And so I think the land of the playground where you might want to hypothesize and explore, it has to be dirty because there's no way we would know exactly what to clean in terms of the entire data. But as you get closer and closer, you're going to want to refine it more and focus, and therefore we'll want it validated. So I mean, I think there's that element of you could not clean what you need to clean. If you focus too much on the wrong thing, then you might be cleaning the wrong item.
But if you're cleaning it, and you're cleaning data that has been tagged properly, and you know what and there's provenance there, and you can track it back and figure it out, then yeah, so it sounds like you have, well, that's R&D, right? That's kind of that Wild West playground versus working in the validated manufacturing side of the house.
Are you enjoying the conversation? We'd love to hear from you. Please subscribe to the podcast and give us a rating. It helps other people find and join the conversation. If you've got speaker or topic ideas, we'd love to hear those too. You can send them in a podcast review. So
let me ask you, as you have worked on your data and now leveraging it for use in where's AZ at with the use of AI?
And so when we say AI, I want to, be clear. There's different even definitions of what falls under that. So, if I think about from end to end development of our compounds, we are using it in almost all of those different components. So if I start off in discovery of trying to find new mechanisms of action, new targets for developing new drugs or products, right now that takes a lot of manpower in a lab, looking at different potential targets. And what we've been able to do is build knowledge graphs of data that, AstraZeneca has a lot of data that we've been sitting on. And now if we can start to plug in algorithms, we can almost begin to have the computer generate potential new mechanism of actions or new potential targets and do a lot of that sort of, I almost call it not in silico anymore, but in computero, and then therefore take your leads and now validate them in the lab. Instead, in the past, you would have had to do a lot of that processing time in the lab to then refine it in the lab. And now if you can shorten the length of time for the lead agents or lead molecules, then we are already seeing that being able to reduce time. And ironically, just recently, the Nobel Prize has gone to this area of trying to explore AI and this ability to do this. So it's exciting to see it's now getting recognition. But that's an example where we're using it in the discovery phase to try to do, I think, molecule recognition or identification of new targets. That's one. In the space of the clinical trials, we're trying to use it to identify safety patterns of medications. And if you think about when I talked about combinations, if we have trials where we have one of the combinations where you have a lot of data around that drug and the safety information about that drug, and you have another data set with a large amount of information about drug B, now if you can add some algorithms on top of it, you might be able to look at, okay, well, if you bring these drugs together, are you going to see different patterns of safety signals that we might need to manage or monitor for if we were to now put these in a clinical trial? So a lot of that is sort of assimilating the vast amount of data you could be sitting on and perhaps look for pattern recognitions that we might miss otherwise. And it might even tell you which combinations would not be good to do together. Because if this drug and this drug both cause a certain safety signal, I'm going to make up neutropenia. If they both cause neutropenia, then combining them might cause even worse neutropenia, and that would not be good to give to a patient. And so if you can do some modeling around that versus testing it in a patient itself, it might tell us, don't put that combination in a patient in a clinical trial. So that's another example. I think of course, we hear a lot about the use of AI, natural language processing, in terms of even dealing with our operational data. So what does operational data mean? Well, we try to run our clinical trials using investigators and sites all over the world. And if we're now going into a certain disease type, we want to know which are the hospitals that see these patients most often. Well, we can now use our databases to try to tell us, these are the sites you should go to because these is where the patients are. And it also gets into like diversity inclusion. If we want more patients who are African American, or we want more patients of underrepresented groups, then we can start to use our data that tells us, well, then you should target these locations, these countries, and change your enrollment of your trial so that you have a better representation in your clinical trial for those groups. Those are just three top examples that come to mind and how we're using AI modeling, natural language processing, et cetera.
That's exciting. I mean, it's funny when you said that we started talking about the diversity of the data. I was thinking about the challenges that we had during COVID, that a lot of that, there was no diversity into the clinical trials, and we didn't know whether that. Do you get data? Do you guys get data from like programs like All of Us and other types of sources of data? Do you tap into like the, Genomics England and those types of, do those things provide value to you?
Well, we definitely have started focusing on what I call multimodal data.
Yeah.
So, clinical trial data, biomarker data, genomic data, because at the end of the day, how do we know any of those could help us decipher which patients will do better with a treatment? And at one time, it could be a biomarker, it could be a gene, it could be something else. And so, I think what's changed you asked me earlier what's changed. Now we have all these different kinds of data. And as I mentioned, the data sets are getting bigger and bigger. It's because we've also added in different modes of data. And I think now we're having to figure out how to, I think it's not easy. It's not hard to see how now, as we get so many larger data sets with complex data sets, the multimodal data may help us begin to hone in on which patients are going to benefit or which patients are safer from
Mm-hmm.
the, yeah.
And it's interesting when you said that multimodal, the first thing then it connected to for me, those interesting connections that you were talking about. That's kind of the interesting combinatorial space.
Yep.
Is taking, different ways of looking at the same data, different data sets and different modes, combining them together and then saying, does this tell, and then asking questions of that. A lot of people talk about using knowledge graphs. I've had questions asked of me like, is anybody getting any value? There's a lot of names, technology names that are used.
Yeah. Yep. I bet.
So it was data lakes at one point, and now we're talking about meshes and graphs, and everybody loves to talk about the technology. But the
Yep.
question is are you getting value in the work that you do from the technology? The technology doesn't give itself value. It's what you can do with it and can you get value out of it? So you mentioned
It's a,
knowledge graphs.
yeah. So it's a chicken and egg because you're not going to get a lot of value out of just having a bunch of tools unless you have something to apply it to. And so it's been an interesting dilemma because how much do you want to invest in building the data lake or the data sets or the knowledge graph in before you start to get value out of it, right? Like there's that tension. But I would say that what we've been starting with the question in mind and then asking ourselves, do we have the data to answer that question? Because it could be you do have the right amount of data, or you can give yourself a hypothesis, and maybe then you have to go get another set of data to validate what you thought. But in the case of AstraZeneca, we were investing for quite a while in building up our data sets. And now, when you add the multimodal data on top of just the clinical trial data, it's a very large amount of data. We also have partnered with external companies on real world data, which is obviously another hot area around how can you use that sort of real world evidence data that's out in the community practices of, in our case, oncology, to be able to help inform what maybe gaps in data that AstraZeneca might have, just as one example. But when you combine real world data with the data that AstraZeneca is sitting on top of, you can see where we might need connectors, like how do you relate patients who we saw in real world to patients in clinical trials. And so a knowledge graph does just that. It begins to sort of build nodes of data, and you look to see how can you connect the nodes, if you will.
And is that working out for you?
Yeah, we have some good examples or test cases where it's getting traction. I think, sometimes your questions that you want to ask, you may or may not have the right data, or you're missing some components, or maybe now you have data and you want to ask questions of it. Well, it doesn't, if it's just sitting there and not getting people asking questions of it, then that I think gives you the question of, did it bring value? We are seeing now examples where the combination space is where we will get more value because we have data sets where, we've tested the one drug and now we're testing the second drug. And that, as I referenced earlier, now being able to sort of use the knowledge graphs to help us with multimodal data and those two drugs examples, it builds up the knowledge about now what we might expect the combo to show us.
So that's where so it's, if I hear you correctly, the desire to find unique combinations is facilitated through knowledge graphs of making it easier.
It's just one example. Yeah, it's just one example.
To make combinations.
Yep.
That's terrific. For companies that are just starting out, do you have any advice for new companies who are thinking about starting their science and organizing their data? And because you have a lot of experience here.
Well, and AZ has experience with some data, but not everything. So there are obviously world evidence data companies where small new startups could go and purchase data. Partnering, collaborating with other, academic institutions is another example of where that works as well, because all startups don't have the ability to have all the data in the world from day one. They rely on other data. And honing in your data, what do you need? And therefore, if you were starting up, what you might need to build, if you were in a startup company or in a new company, might be a smaller amount of data. And it doesn't hurt to also think about who you're going to need and what are the capabilities you're going to need. And some of that you can borrow and, get consultants to help you, or some of it you might want to start building yourself, just as we had to start at some point when, we started our data science group here at AstraZeneca.
So my final question for you.
Yeah.
I'd love to get your advice for scientists that were like you. What advice would you give those people today? Because they may aspire to grow someday like you.
Mm-hmm.
What words of wisdom and advice can you have for the new grads the new scientists that are entering the field today?
So it's interesting because I actually serve as a mentor to graduate students at Vanderbilt University, where I went. And I get the chance to meet with them, and they ask, about careers in industry, careers they should consider. And I have definitely, the world of data science is a hot area. And whether it'll be hot by the time all of them graduate, and as you and I talked about earlier, scientists will begin to know more about it, and there won't be these two worlds, it'll collide into each other. I have definitely urged them to consider, understanding the world of data science and all that it could bring, because even if they were going to be a bench scientist, I think it will help them in the future to know the space of machine learning and AI, because I do believe that it will play a larger role in science in the future and in oncology in the future. And it's better to learn it now. So every single one of them, I talk to them about learning a bit about it. And maybe they don't need to double down and have a double major and a double PhD or another degree, but enough knowledge about it to be able to already be the translator, like I talked about earlier, and not feel intimidated by it, because it will help them in the future be able to be better scientists either way.
Wow. Well, this has been a very great conversation. I'm really excited. I'm excited for the work that you and AstraZeneca are doing around oncology. It makes me feel good to be able to know that that's going on in our industry, and that, what we experienced with my dad, other families might not have that. So I encourage you and thank you for all your hard work in this industry and commitment to oncology, because there are a lot of families that are counting on you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Renee.
you for doing this to educate everybody, because not everybody understands what it takes to bring oncology drugs to patients. And so every little bit of education and what that means is, I think, helpful. So you're doing your part.
Yeah, and hopefully your parents now know what you do for a living. All right, Renee. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to BioIT World's Trends from the Trenches podcast.